There is a kind of silence that does not come from fear, but from power. It is the silence of a person who has learned to master themselves in the face of those who try to diminish them. Imagine entering a room where the air hums with quiet judgment. Someone looks at you, not with hatred, but with that subtle indifference that makes you feel smaller than you are. They do not need to insult you. Their silence, their smirk, their eyes that slide away as if you are invisible, say enough. You feel something shift inside, a tightness in the chest, a flicker of heat beneath the skin. You want to respond, to prove, to speak, to defend your worth against their unspoken contempt. Yet, something within you hesitates, as if a wiser voice is whispering that this is not your battlefield. That is the moment when you stand at a crossroads, to react and lose your center, or to remain silent and reclaim your power. Most of us have been taught that silence is weakness, that to remain quiet is to be submissive or afraid. But this is not true. There exists a silence that is stronger than argument, sharper than any retort, and more commanding than the loudest voice. This silence is not empty. It is full of presence, control, and clarity. When people belittle you, they are not seeking truth. They are seeking reaction. They want to provoke you into revealing your insecurity so they can feel superior. Every time you rush to defend yourself, you give them exactly what they want, proof that they have the power to disturb your peace. But when you remain silent, not because you cannot speak, but because you choose not to, the balance shifts. You are no longer reacting to their noise. You are defining the atmosphere itself. They expect resistance, and instead they meet stillness. And that stillness exposes the shallowness of their game. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes your most elegant form of defiance. It is not passive, it is deliberate. It says, I will not let your disrespect dictate the rhythm of my soul. I will not spend my energy convincing you of my worth, because my worth does not depend on your recognition. This is not the silence of fear. It is the silence of mastery. It is a silence that protects dignity, preserves peace, and commands respect without demanding it. It is the same silence that has shaped philosophers, warriors, monks, and leaders throughout history. Those who understand it know that words can be weapons, but silence can be a shield. And sometimes, the shield cuts deeper than the sword. When you encounter contempt, the greatest danger lies not in what others say, but in what they awaken within you. If you let their disdain pull you into anger or defensiveness, you hand them control of your emotions. You begin to live in reaction rather than intention, and your energy scatters. But if you pause, breathe, and remain grounded, their words pass through you like wind through trees. You do not suppress your feelings. You simply rise above them. The world may not understand this kind of silence, but it will feel it. In that quiet composure, others sense something unshakable. You become unpredictable, unreadable, and therefore unassailable. People fear what they cannot manipulate, and no one can manipulate a person who is calm. To be calm in the face of contempt is not to be numb. It is to be sovereign. You may notice how such silence unsettles those who try to offend you. They become uncomfortable, fidgeting in the emptiness they expected you to fill with anger. Their power fades, not because you attacked them, but because you refused to play. They sought reaction. You gave them reflection. They threw fire, and you gave them air, and the flame died on its own. This is not stoicism born of pride, but wisdom born of self-respect. To remain silent when provoked is to understand that dignity is not something you perform for others. It is something you maintain within. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your calm, nor an apology for your restraint. The silence you hold becomes a mirror in which others must confront themselves. It forces them to face the emptiness of their own arrogance. And perhaps, One day, it will even teach them humility. But that is not your goal. Your silence is not for them. It is for you. It keeps your focus inward, your strength contained, and your spirit unbroken. The world will always have people who project their insecurities onto others. They will test you with sarcasm, ignore your achievements, question your intelligence, or dismiss your presence. You cannot control that. What you can control is your response. When you stay calm and silent, you declare that their noise is beneath your frequency. You choose not to engage in battles that cost your peace. This is not indifference. It is emotional intelligence. It is the art of conserving your energy for what truly matters. Silence does not mean you do not feel. It means you feel deeply enough to decide which feelings deserve expression and which deserve transmutation. When you channel that restraint, your silence becomes magnetic. People begin to sense a weight in your presence, as though you carry something they cannot name. That something is simply alignment, the harmony between your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. Most people are loud because they are scattered. The silent person, however, is centered, and the world bends towards center. In the end, your silence will speak louder than any defense you could offer. It will not scream, but it will resonate. It will say, "I am not here to prove. I am here to be." Those who misunderstand you will call it pride. Those who understand will call it strength. But you need neither label, because silence needs no witness. It stands on its own. And so, when you face the next moment of disdain, remember this: silence is not the absence of voice. It is the presence of control. It is not retreat. It is command. And when you master that art, you will find that the world, no matter how loud, cannot shake a mind that has learned to rest in its own stillness. For in silence, you are not defeated. You are undefeated, because nothing outside of you can touch what remains unmoved within. There is a moment, so brief it almost goes unnoticed, when emotion begins to rise. When the sting of someone's words or the weight of their condescension triggers something deep inside you. It happens in the body first. A tightening of the jaw, a quickening of the pulse, a heat in the chest that begs for release. Your mind begins to race, constructing arguments, comebacks, proofs of your worth. In that instant, you stand at the border between control and chaos, and the decision you make there determines whether you will rule yourself or be ruled by another. Most people cross that border without awareness. They react. They defend. They let anger drive their tongue, not realizing that in doing so, they hand their power to the very person who tried to provoke them. Reaction is the easiest thing in the world. It feels natural, even righteous. But what feels like liberation in the moment becomes captivity afterward. You replay the scene, wish you had stayed calm, wish you had not said so much. That regret is the echo of power given away. The one who provoked you is long gone, but the disturbance remains, like ripples after a stone has sunk. The truth is simple. When you react, you become their creation. When you stay silent, you remain your own. People who belittle others thrive on reaction because reaction confirms their influence. They do not seek understanding. They seek control. They want to see your calm fracture, your composure crack, your dignity stumble. It gives them a sense of superiority that their spirit cannot otherwise sustain. And so, when you react, even with perfect logic or justified anger, you validate their narrative that they can move you. Silence, on the other hand, is refusal. It says, you can project whatever you want, but you cannot enter me. It turns provocation into a mirror, and in that mirror, the aggressor begins to see their own smallness. This is not about suppression. It is about transcendence. You are not avoiding the fight because you are weak. You are rising above it because you understand that no one wins in the mud. True power is not in domination, it is in restraint. Every reaction costs energy, and every ounce of that energy is taken from your peace. To stay silent is to conserve strength, to keep your focus within, where transformation happens. Imagine two people arguing in a crowded place, voices rising, gestures sharp, faces red. Then imagine a third person standing quietly nearby, eyes steady, breath calm. Without speaking a word, that person already holds the highest ground. Everyone around senses it, the difference between noise and presence. That is the essence of non-reaction. It is the quiet authority of one who does not need to prove anything. Yet this does not mean that silence is always easy. It is, in fact, the hardest discipline. The mind wants to fight for dignity, but the heart knows that dignity cannot be given or taken. It can only be remembered. When you remain silent under attack, you feel the heat of your own ego begging for release. It feels unnatural at first, even painful. But if you breathe through it, if you hold that energy without expressing it, it begins to change shape. The anger dissolves into clarity. You start to see the situation not as a threat, but as a lesson, a mirror showing you how free or unfree you really are. Every provocation becomes a test of mastery. Can you stay centered even when someone else forgets their center? That is emotional sovereignty. It means your state of mind no longer depends on anyone's behavior. It is a kind of freedom that cannot be taken away because it comes from awareness, not approval. Once you experience that kind of calm, you realize that most conflicts in life are invitations, not to fight, but to wake up. They reveal the places within you still tied to pride and fear, still dependent on others for validation. When you no longer react, those ties begin to dissolve. The world's insults lose their meaning because they no longer find a wound to enter. You start to understand what the ancient philosophers meant when they said that no one can harm the wise man. They did not mean that harm does not exist, but that awareness cannot be harmed. It observes everything, feels everything, but remains untouched. That is what silence gives you, the space to observe without identifying. Someone insults you. You hear the words, but you no longer become the wound. You feel the emotion rise, but you watch it rather than act it out. And in that watching, you discover the secret. Reaction was never necessary. You can let the wave rise and fall without drowning in it. You can let their noise pass while your stillness remains. The reward of this practice is immense. People will begin to treat you differently, not because you demanded respect, but because they sense something immovable in you. They may not even understand it consciously, but they will feel it. An energy that says, this one cannot be provoked. It is the same energy you find in masters, monks, and wise elders. They do not argue because they have nothing to prove. They do not raise their voices because they know truth needs no defense. Their silence is not withdrawal, it is containment of power. When you cultivate that stillness, you begin to see how small most provocations are. The things that once consumed your energy start to feel irrelevant. You learn that not every truth needs to be spoken. Not every insult needs to be corrected. Not every attack needs to be met. Silence becomes your filter, separating what deserves your voice from what deserves your stillness. In time, this restraint transforms you. You no longer walk into rooms looking for respect. You carry it with you. You no longer beg to be understood. You understand yourself. You no longer chase justice in petty matters because your peace is too valuable to trade for vindication. The world remains noisy, but you are no longer part of its noise. You have learned the rare art of holding your center when everything around you spins. And that is not detachment, it is mastery. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that no one can define you unless you allow it. When you master non-reaction, you begin to experience a different kind of victory, one that leaves no bitterness behind. You walk away not triumphant over others, but at peace with yourself. You realize that the real win is not in silencing your opponents, but in silencing the chaos within. Every time you choose silence over reaction, you sharpen the blade of your awareness. It cuts through illusion, through pride, through ego, until only clarity remains. And that clarity is freedom. The freedom to exist beyond insult, beyond praise, beyond all the noise that once ruled you. That is the hidden strength behind true silence. It is not the absence of voice, but the presence of wisdom that no attack can reach. There comes a time in every person's life when silence stops being just a reaction and begins to evolve into a way of being. It becomes not something you practice occasionally when provoked, but the very ground you walk on, a foundation of self-awareness so stable that the world's noise can no longer unsettle it. This transformation does not happen overnight. It begins slowly, like the quiet growth of roots beneath the soil, unseen but unshakable. At first, silence feels unnatural, even forced, because we have been conditioned to equate speech with control. We think that to stay relevant, we must speak. To stay respected, we must respond. To stay safe, we must explain. Yet, the more we rely on words to assert our presence, the more fragile that presence becomes. True power does not announce itself, it emanates. It needs no justification, no argument, no witness. When silence settles within you, your presence itself begins to speak on your behalf. People feel it in the way you move, the way you breathe, the way your eyes hold steady without aggression. It is a kind of strength that whispers instead of shouts, and yet it commands a deeper kind of attention. You begin to notice that silence has its own language, a language of energy, poise, and groundedness. When you enter a room with that energy, others instinctively adjust themselves, not because you have said anything, but because something about you feels immovable. This is the moment when silence evolves from defense into influence. You no longer stay quiet just to avoid conflict. You stay quiet because you understand that words are often unnecessary. They dilute what your stillness can convey far more effectively. In silence, your focus sharpens, your intuition awakens, and you begin to sense things that others miss. You see through pretense, through manipulation, through insecurity disguised as confidence. You start to hear what people truly mean beneath what they say. Silence turns you into a listener of life itself, and in that listening, wisdom takes root. You stop needing to dominate conversations because you realize that power is not in speaking louder, but in understanding deeper. There is a kind of intelligence that only quiet can give, the intelligence of perception. When you observe more and speak less, you begin to notice how the world reveals itself in layers. You see patterns in human behavior, how insecurity often hides behind arrogance, how cruelty masks fear, how flattery conceals need. You stop taking things personally because you understand that people rarely act from clarity. They act from their wounds. Silence allows you to step back and see this truth without judgment. It gives you compassion without losing discernment. You can forgive others without excusing them, and you can protect your peace without closing your heart. This balance, firm yet gentle, calm yet awake, is the essence of maturity. It is not about indifference, it is about awareness. In the practice of silence, your relationship with pain also changes. You no longer rush to fill uncomfortable moments with noise. You no longer drown your loneliness in distraction. Instead, you sit with it, breathe through it, and discover that silence has room for every emotion. In the quiet, you meet your own vulnerability without shame. You learn to comfort yourself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. This is how self-respect grows, not through pride, but through tenderness toward your own heart. In that intimacy with yourself, external approval begins to lose its grip. You no longer crave applause, nor do you fear disapproval. Both become echoes in the distance, interesting but irrelevant. You start to realize that what you once mistook for confidence was often just noise trying to cover doubt. Real confidence is silent because it no longer needs validation. It is the steady flame that does not flicker even when the wind blows. It does not demand to be seen because it knows it cannot be extinguished. That is the paradox of true power. The quieter it becomes, the greater its presence. As this silence deepens, you begin to see how unnecessary most conflicts truly are. How many arguments in life are born not out of principle, but out of ego? How many words are wasted trying to convince those who do not wish to understand? You begin to see the futility of noise. You understand that people do not hear with their ears. They hear with their level of awareness, and you cannot raise their awareness by shouting. But your silence, steady, grounded, self-assured, becomes a mirror in which they might glimpse themselves. That is the most powerful form of influence there is. Silence does not seek to win. It invites reflection. It shifts the atmosphere without confrontation. It changes dynamics without force. This is why those who embody it are often described as magnetic. They draw others in, not with charm, but with gravity. They are like mountains, still, silent, yet impossible to ignore. And just like mountains, their silence is not emptiness. It is depth. It is not the absence of motion, but the presence of purpose. When you reach this stage, silence no longer feels like an effort. It feels like home. You start to move through life at a slower rhythm, one that allows you to savor moments, to hear the pauses between sounds, to feel the space between breaths. Even in conversations, you find that pauses no longer feel awkward. They feel sacred. They give room for meaning to settle. You become more intentional with words because you know their weight. You speak less, but what you say carries resonance. People listen differently because your silence has trained them to. They sense that you do not waste language, that every word has been chosen with care. In a world addicted to speed and noise, that kind of presence is revolutionary. It disarms aggression and softens chaos. It reminds people, without preaching, that calmness is not weakness, but mastery. This is how silence becomes your identity. It is not something you perform. It is something you are. And when you live from that space, you discover that silence is not loneliness. It is connection of the highest order. It connects you to yourself, to others, and to the subtle rhythm of life that cannot be heard in noise. You begin to realize that silence is not a void, but a vessel. It holds understanding, empathy, wisdom, and strength. It is not empty. It is full of everything that truly matters. And as you continue to cultivate it, you will notice that the world responds to you differently. Opportunities flow more easily. Conflicts resolve themselves without struggle. People treat you with more respect, not because you demanded it, but because your silence commands it. In the end, you understand that silence is not a reaction to life. It is a dialogue with it. And when you learn to listen in that dialogue, life itself begins to whisper secrets that the noisy will never hear. There is a stage beyond discipline, beyond restraint, when silence ceases to be a deliberate act and becomes a natural state of awareness. It is no longer something you must remind yourself to practice. It flows through you as easily as breath. This kind of silence is not about controlling your tongue. It is about transforming your perception. It changes the way you experience reality itself. you begin to see that every moment of noise, every instance of conflict or tension, is simply the surface turbulence of a much deeper stillness that never moves. Most people live entirely on the surface. They react to every ripple, every disturbance, never realizing that below the chaos of thoughts and emotions lies a vast, quiet ocean of consciousness. When you touch that depth within yourself, you stop fighting waves. You start observing them. And as you observe, you begin to understand that silence is not the absence of sound. It is the background that gives sound meaning. Without silence, music would be unbearable. Without pauses, language would be incomprehensible. In the same way, your inner silence gives shape to your life. It provides the space in which awareness can unfold. Once you have tasted that inner stillness, you no longer mistake noise for aliveness. You no longer chase distractions to escape yourself. The world becomes your mirror, and silence your teacher. You start to recognize patterns in people, the way insecurity manifests as arrogance, the way fear hides behind control, the way loneliness dresses itself in superiority. And each time you witness these patterns, you find yourself judging less. You see that what once provoked you now only invites compassion because you realize that others are not truly attacking you. They are defending themselves from their own pain. This understanding does not make you weak. It makes you untouchable. It frees you from taking anything personally. You can look into the eyes of someone who despises you and feel neither hatred nor fear, only clarity. That clarity is the reward of silence. It is the light that comes when the dust of reaction finally settles. In that clarity, even time begins to slow down. You notice details you once ignored, the tone behind someone's words, the pauses between their sentences, the tension in their posture. You begin to listen, not just with your ears, but with your entire being. You hear what is said and what is unsaid. You sense the emotion behind the statement, the story behind the emotion, the wound behind the story. And suddenly, silence becomes empathy. You start to respond to life, not through judgment, but through understanding. You realize that most people are not cruel. They are just loud with pain. Most anger is sadness in disguise. Most arrogance is fear wearing armor. When you meet the world from that insight, your silence becomes a form of love. You no longer need to correct or confront everyone who is wrong. You let truth reveal itself through time, not through argument. You trust that what is real does not need your defense. This is not passivity. It is faith in the natural order of things. It is knowing that everything false eventually collapses under its own noise, and everything true endures quietly. You begin to move differently, slower, more deliberate, more attuned. You speak when necessary, and your words carry the weight of reflection. You no longer talk to fill space, but to bring light into it. Your conversations deepen. People feel seen in your presence because you are not waiting for your turn to speak. You are fully there. This kind of attention is rare, and people can sense its rarity. They begin to trust you, even if they do not understand why. You have become a mirror for their own stillness. That is the true power of silence. It awakens silence in others. In your calm, they remember their own potential for calm. In your patience, they find the space to soften. You start to notice how environments shift around you. Arguments fade faster. Chaos organizes itself. Even your presence in a room seems to lower the volume of life. You have become, without trying, a stabilizing force. The energy you carry becomes a quiet influence that ripples outward, affecting others not through control, but through coherence. It is the kind of leadership that cannot be taught in words, because it comes from being rather than doing. People begin to sense that your silence is not absence, but awareness, that you are not avoiding the world, but engaging with it on a higher frequency. You see the futility of constant talking, constant defending, constant trying to be right. You realize that truth needs no noise. It is self-evident to those who are ready to perceive it. And so, you stop performing. You stop debating with those who argue not to learn, but to win. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. This is not arrogance, it is efficiency. It is emotional minimalism. You spend your energy only where it can grow something worthwhile. You stop scattering yourself in every direction and instead become whole in one place, within. From that wholeness, everything you do acquires a new quality. Your work, your art, your relationships, they all begin to carry the resonance of your inner quiet. You become more creative because silence is the mother of creation. Every great idea, every insight is born from stillness. You become more intuitive because your mind is no longer clogged with noise. You begin to feel when to act, when to wait, when to speak, when to remain silent. It is as if you are guided by an intelligence greater than thought, a kind of inner compass that always points you toward balance. This is what the ancient masters meant when they spoke of alignment. Silence aligns you with reality. It synchronizes you with the rhythm of life, the unseen harmony beneath all appearances. You begin to see that everything has its own timing, and that your impatience was only ever resistance to that timing. When you trust the rhythm, you no longer rush. You let things unfold in their season, just as flowers bloom, not when demanded, but when ready. This trust brings peace, and that peace radiates through every aspect of your being. It is not a peace that isolates, it connects. You become more human, not less. You laugh easier because you no longer carry the tension of proving. You forgive faster because you no longer cling to stories of injustice. You live lighter because silence has taught you what to let go of and what to hold on to. And what remains in the end is not emptiness, but essence. The essence of who you truly are. Calm, aware, unshaken. The world may still be loud, but within you, there is only stillness. And in that stillness, you finally understand. You were never meant to conquer others. You were meant to conquer yourself. And in doing so, you become untouchable, not because no one challenges you, but because nothing disturbs your peace. That is the power of silence in its purest form. Not the power to dominate, but the power to remain whole in a world that has forgotten how to be quiet. There is a kind of strength that can only be cultivated in silence, a strength that does not need to be proven or displayed, because it exists beyond visibility. When you stop arguing with the world, when you no longer waste your energy on convincing or correcting others, something remarkable begins to happen inside you. Your inner voice grows louder, clearer, and wiser. What once required explanation now simply radiates through your presence. You begin to understand that the most profound form of communication has nothing to do with words and everything to do with energy. People can feel who you are long before they understand what you say. Every thought, every emotion, every intention sends out a subtle vibration that shapes the way others perceive you. When your energy is calm and silent, it creates an atmosphere of stability that others instinctively trust. This is why silence has always been a sign of wisdom throughout history, because it indicates mastery over one's own inner state. The person who can remain still in chaos, quiet in noise, and centered in provocation has discovered a secret that most will never find. Peace is power. You see, when you are loud, you are externalizing your energy, scattering it into the world. But when you are silent, you are consolidating it, containing it, refining it. The loud depend on reaction. The silent depend on resonance. The loud seek validation. The silent generate gravity. and gravity always pulls more strongly than sound. That is why truly powerful people rarely need to shout. Their words are few, but their impact is deep, because their silence has already prepared the ground for meaning. The mind that is noisy cannot perceive truth. It only repeats patterns. But the mind that has learned to rest in silence becomes a mirror, perfectly reflecting whatever stands before it without distortion. In that reflection, clarity arises. You begin to make decisions not from impulse, but from insight. You no longer chase opportunities. You recognize which ones are meant for you. You no longer try to control outcomes. You learn to align with them. Silence becomes a kind of internal compass that guides you through uncertainty. It tells you when to move forward and when to wait, when to speak and when to withdraw. And because it speaks in whispers, you must learn to listen carefully, to trust the stillness more than the noise of your own thoughts. That trust is what transforms silence into intuition. When you act from that space, your choices carry an uncanny precision. Things fall into place, not because you are lucky, but because you are aligned. Yet, this level of stillness requires courage. It demands that you stop seeking constant stimulation, that you face the emptiness most people spend their lives avoiding. The reason many cannot be silent is because silence confronts them with themselves. It strips away distraction, leaving only the raw presence of their own being. And for those who have built their identity on external approval, that can feel unbearable. But if you stay with that discomfort long enough, if you let it wash over you without running away, you will find something extraordinary beneath it. A quiet sense of wholeness that has nothing to do with anyone else's perception. You will discover that you are enough, not because someone says so, but because existence itself confirms it in every breath you take. From that realization, all the games of ego begin to fall away. You stop competing, comparing, defending, performing. You start existing in authenticity. Silence has stripped away everything false, and what remains is your essence, simple, grounded, real. This authenticity changes the quality of your interactions. You no longer seek attention, but you receive it effortlessly. You no longer chase love, but love begins to find you. You no longer beg to be understood, but people start to listen when you finally speak, because your words come from a place of truth. This is the paradox of silence. When you stop trying to be seen, you become visible in a way that no noise could ever achieve. People cannot help but be drawn to someone who is comfortable in stillness, because that comfort reflects the peace they themselves are seeking. Your silence becomes magnetic, and your presence becomes medicine. You do not need to fix others. Your very calmness heals them. When they sit with you, their thoughts slow down. Their breathing deepens. They feel safe without knowing why. That is the unspoken gift of silence. It regulates the energy around it. It turns any space into a sanctuary. This kind of influence cannot be faked, because it does not come from effort. It comes from embodiment. You cannot pretend to be calm. You must be calm. You cannot imitate stillness. You must live it. And once you live it, you carry it with you everywhere. Even in moments of conflict or chaos, your silence becomes your shield. People sense that they cannot shake you, and so they begin to respect you, even if they do not like you. Respect earned through silence is the most enduring kind, because it comes not from fear, but from recognition. They may not understand your restraint, but they cannot deny its power. They may misinterpret your calm as indifference, but deep down, they feel its weight. It is the weight of someone who no longer needs the world to validate their existence. That is the essence of dignity. Quiet, steady, self-contained. And once you taste that dignity, you will never want to trade it again for the fleeting satisfaction of reaction. Because silence gives you something that no victory in argument can ever provide: freedom. The freedom to remain at peace regardless of circumstances. The freedom to walk away without resentment. The freedom to rise above insult, above ego, above the endless noise of a world that has forgotten how to listen. When you reach that place, you begin to realize that silence was never emptiness. It was fullness all along. It held within it everything you were searching for: clarity, strength, compassion, and truth. You no longer look to others to define you, because you have found the quiet space within where definition is unnecessary. In that space, you are not superior or inferior, not praised or condemned. You simply are. And that state of being, that unshakable awareness, is the true measure of power. For what can the world do to a person who no longer depends on it for peace? Nothing. They can mock, misunderstand, or ignore you, but they cannot reach you. You have stepped beyond their game into the realm of silence, where real freedom lives. And from that place, every act, every word, every glance becomes imbued with the quiet authority of one who has mastered themselves. That is the silent revolution of strength, the kind that changes everything without ever making a sound. When silence becomes strength, it ceases to be merely a reaction or even a shield. It turns into a living force, an invisible current that shapes how the world responds to you. The more you live in stillness, the more you realize that true influence does not require assertion. It requires presence. Presence is what remains when noise ends, when effort stops, when you no longer need to perform the self you once built to be accepted. In that quiet space, you start to feel something extraordinary. Life begins to arrange itself around your calm. People listen differently. Circumstances unfold with less resistance. Even problems that once seemed heavy lose their sharpness. It is not because the world has changed. It is because you have changed the way you meet it. Stillness redefines the rhythm of your existence. You walk slower, think clearer, decide cleaner. You no longer rush to fill silences with explanations or apologies. You no longer mistake movement for progress. You begin to value pauses as much as actions. This shift is subtle but revolutionary because the modern world is built on noise. Constant conversation, endless performance, a collective addiction to being heard. In such a world, the person who can remain silent stands out effortlessly, like a still lake amid storms. People feel drawn to that calm, even if they cannot explain why. It is because silence emanates security. It tells others, without a single word, you are safe here. Nothing needs to be forced. That kind of presence disarms tension and invites trust. It is the quality found in great leaders, healers, and creators, not because they dominate rooms, but because they harmonize them. When you embody that stillness, you become a tuning fork for balance. The energy of others adjusts naturally to yours. Anger loses its fuel. Anxiety softens. Chaos finds order. This is what it means for silence to become magnetic. It no longer protects you alone. It transforms the space around you. You are no longer simply surviving the world's noise. You are reorganizing it. This is not mysticism. It is human resonance. Science confirms that emotional states are contagious, that nervous systems sync in proximity. When your breathing slows, others unconsciously match it. When your tone is steady, voices around you drop their volume. When your body is still, movement settles in others. Your silence becomes an unspoken command, not through control, but through coherence. You have aligned yourself so deeply with calm that everything around you instinctively seeks to align as well. That is the silent command of true composure. But this kind of influence is not achieved through suppression. It comes from integration. You have not killed your emotions. You have understood them. You have not silenced your thoughts. You have learned to let them pass without attachment. Silence, when mature, is not the absence of voice, but the mastery of it. It is knowing when to speak and when to withhold, when to act, and when to simply allow. It is wisdom wearing the face of patience. In that state, your confidence deepens. Not because you believe you are always right, but because you are no longer afraid of being wrong. You can listen without defensiveness. You can pause without discomfort. You can stand in uncertainty without collapsing into panic. This quiet confidence communicates far more powerfully than pride ever could. People sense that you do not need to prove yourself. They feel the security of someone who is at home within their own being. And that feeling is rare, almost sacred, in a world of constant seeking. When you speak from that space, every word carries weight. You no longer talk to convince. You talk to clarify. Your language becomes minimal but meaningful. You begin to notice that silence itself punctuates your speech in ways that make your words land deeper. Pauses become part of the message. Listeners lean in, not because you are loud, but because you are real. Silence gives your words the gravity that noise never could. Even in leadership, you find that control through silence is more effective than command through volume. A calm gaze achieves more than a raised voice. A moment of listening dissolves more resistance than a speech of persuasion. Silence becomes strategy, not manipulation, but mastery of energy. You begin to see that power and peace are not opposites. They are twins born from the same root. The stronger your peace, the greater your power. And that power is not force, it is influence that flows effortlessly. The ancient masters knew this truth. They spoke of the warrior who wins without fighting, the sage who teaches without speaking. At the time, such sayings sounded poetic, but now you begin to understand them. When you dwell in silence, you do not resist life, you redirect it. You become the calm center in the spinning wheel of existence, guiding movement without being moved. And yet, this state does not make you distant or cold. On the contrary, it makes you profoundly connected. Your silence is not a wall. It is an open space where others feel invited to drop their masks. It is not detachment, but deep empathy, the kind that listens without needing to fix. When you meet someone's pain with silence instead of advice, they feel truly seen. When you witness someone's anger without reacting, they begin to hear themselves. Your silence becomes a mirror, allowing others to confront their truth without judgment. This is how stillness heals. It reflects rather than reacts. You realize that your presence can be medicine, not because you try to help, but because you embody peace so authentically that it becomes contagious. And in a world starving for calm, that is the greatest gift you can give. The irony of it all is that silence, which once seemed like a retreat, has become the most active force in your life. It shapes outcomes, deepens connections, and protects your energy without you needing to lift a finger. You have learned that stillness is not inaction. It is the most deliberate action of all. It is the choice to stay aligned with truth when everything else tempts you to react. It is the discipline of remaining whole when others fragment. It is the courage to let peace be your loudest statement. And so, the next time someone questions your silence, let them wonder. Let them misinterpret it as mystery or pride. You owe no explanation. For those who can hear, your silence says everything. I have mastered myself. I have nothing to prove. I am free. There is a sacred turning point in the journey of silence when it stops being a psychological tool and becomes a spiritual awakening, when it no longer serves merely to protect your peace, but to reveal who you truly are, beyond the noise of identity. You begin to see that all the battles you fought, every argument, every defense, every effort to be seen or respected were only shadows cast by a restless ego that mistook attention for existence. In silence, that illusion begins to fade. The more you rest in quiet awareness, the clearer it becomes that what you call me is not a fixed self, but a constantly changing collection of thoughts, roles, and stories. You start to notice how the ego resists stillness, how it trembles in the absence of recognition. It whispers, "If I do not speak, I will disappear. If I am not seen, I am nothing." Yet, when you do not obey that voice, something deeper emerges, an awareness that does not need validation because it already is. You discover that your essence is not the one who reacts, but the one who watches the reaction. It is not the storm, but the sky behind it. The ego thrives on noise. It needs constant movement to sustain its illusion of control. It feeds on comparison, praise, and conflict alike, because both prove its own existence. But silence starves it. Silence exposes it as the imposter it has always been. And that exposure, though unsettling, is liberation. You begin to realize that the person others see, the image you defend, the reputation you polish, is merely a costume you have worn in the theater of life. Beneath it lies something vast and luminous, untouched by judgment, beyond insult or praise. That is your true nature, your consciousness, your soul. The more you dwell in silence, the more this realization becomes experiential rather than intellectual. You start to sense that even as your mind thinks, there is a deeper part of you that simply observes. Even as emotions surge, there is a still space within that remains unmoved. That space is not indifferent. It is infinite. It is the same stillness you find in nature, in the quiet before dawn, in the pause between breaths. It is the same essence that exists in every living being, the shared awareness beneath the illusion of separation. Once you glimpse it, your relationship with the world changes completely. You no longer see people as enemies or allies, but as different expressions of the same consciousness. Their cruelty does not wound you because you understand it as unconsciousness. Their kindness does not inflate you because you see it as connection. You begin to forgive, not out of moral duty, but out of recognition. You see yourself in everyone, and everyone in you. Silence has made you porous. Life flows through you without resistance. The ego may still whisper, may still crave acknowledgement, but now you watch it with gentle amusement, as one might watch a child acting out a familiar play. Its drama no longer seduces you, because you know it is not real. This realization does not make you passive, it makes you serene. You continue to live, to love, to work, but your motivation shifts from fear to presence. You no longer act to become someone. You act because you are someone. Your silence gives birth to authenticity, and authenticity gives birth to freedom. In this state, you also begin to understand the difference between external silence and inner silence. You may still speak, laugh, engage, but inside, there is no noise, no commentary, no conflict. It is as if your being hums with a quiet rhythm that is aligned with the pulse of the universe. You feel connected to something far greater than yourself, and that connection replaces the endless hunger for recognition. You stop asking, "Who sees me?" and start wondering, "What sees through me?" The answer is both humbling and empowering. It is consciousness itself, using your eyes to behold creation. This is the spiritual dimension of silence, realizing that the witness within you is the same witness in everyone else. In this awareness, you cannot truly be disrespected, because respect and disrespect exist only on the surface level of personality. Beneath that surface, there is only one field of being, observing itself in infinite forms. That is why spiritual silence feels so vast. It is not empty. It is full of everything. It contains the world and yet remains untouched by it. When you dwell in this space, you begin to live differently. You stop resisting life. You stop forcing outcomes. You begin to trust the intelligence that governs existence. You notice how everything unfolds in perfect timing when you stop interfering. You act when moved by clarity and wait when silence guides you to pause. Every decision becomes simpler because it arises from intuition, not fear. You start to see synchronicities, subtle alignments that feel like the universe nodding back at your awareness. It is as if silence itself has begun to speak to you, not in words, but in signs and feelings, in the gentle orchestration of moments. You realize that the language of silence is guidance, and the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. This is why mystics and sages across cultures have spoken of silence as divine communion. They were not escaping the world. They were entering it more deeply than words could reach. Their silence was not withdrawal, but intimacy with truth. You do not have to be a monk or hermit to experience this. You only have to become attentive. You only have to turn down the volume of thought long enough to hear the quiet hum of existence. Once you do, every ordinary moment becomes extraordinary. The sound of rain becomes music. The sight of sunlight on water becomes revelation. The rhythm of your own breathing becomes prayer. Silence opens your eyes to the sacredness of everything. And in that sacredness, judgment dissolves. You stop labeling experiences as good or bad. You simply witness their unfolding. You start to see beauty even in endings, wisdom even in pain, grace even in loss. Silence reveals the hidden order beneath apparent chaos. It shows you that life is not happening to you. It is happening through you. And when you finally grasp that truth, the last fragment of ego, its need for control, melts away. What remains is surrender, not as defeat, but as union. You become life itself, aware of its own presence. And in that awareness, you understand the essence of all spirituality. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be proven. And silence was never a lack of expression, but the highest form of it. In this silence, you are not merely alive. You are awake. Once silence has become a state of being, the next challenge is learning to carry it into the fabric of daily life, to live it not only in meditation or solitude, but in the midst of conversation, conflict, and responsibility. This is where stillness ceases to be philosophy and becomes practice. It is one thing to find peace in the quiet of a morning before the world awakens, and another to maintain that peace when the phone rings, the deadlines close in, and the noise of life demands your attention. Yet this is the ultimate purpose of silence, to be lived, not escaped into. You begin to understand that every moment of the day is an invitation to return to that inner stillness, to act from it rather than be pulled away from it. It is not about rejecting the world. It is about meeting the world with presence. You learn to start your mornings with silence, not as a ritual, but as a way of remembering who you are before the world tells you who to be. You wake up and listen to your breath, to the birds, to the faint hum of life stirring around you. And in that listening, you feel the alignment between the outer world and your inner world. You realize that peace is not something you find later. It is something you start with. From there, your day unfolds differently. When you go to work, you no longer feel the need to speak first in meetings, to prove your intelligence or assert your ideas. You discover that power often belongs to the one who speaks last, or not at all, until the noise subsides and clarity emerges. You listen not only to words, but to tone, rhythm, and intention. You hear what is not being said, the subtle anxieties and hidden desires that lie beneath speech. When you finally respond, your words come from understanding rather than impulse, and people feel the difference. They sense thoughtfulness in your pauses, sincerity in your tone. Silence has given your communication depth, and depth is what the world listens to even when it doesn't realize it. At home, silence reshapes your relationships. You stop listening to argue and begin listening to understand. You no longer rush to fix every problem or fill every pause with advice. You learn that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply to be fully present without interference. When someone you care for is upset, you sit with them quietly, holding space for their emotions without judgment. Your silence becomes sanctuary. It says what words cannot. I am here. I understand. You are safe. In this way, silence teaches compassion, not the sentimental kind that tries to rescue, but the kind that respects the other person's path. You realize that listening is not waiting for your turn to speak. It is allowing another soul to unfold before you. This quality of attention transforms connection. People begin to open up to you, not because you have answers, but because your presence makes them feel heard. And the truth is, being heard is often all a person needs to begin healing. Even in conflict, silence becomes your greatest ally. When emotions rise and tempers flare, you remember that reaction is the fire that keeps arguments alive. Instead of fueling it, you breathe and wait. Your stillness interrupts the momentum of hostility. It forces a pause in which both sides can see themselves more clearly. You realize that you don't need to win every argument. You only need to preserve your peace. Often, your silence says more than any defense could. It communicates boundaries without aggression, self-respect without arrogance. People may try to provoke you, mistaking your calm for weakness, but in time, they learn that your silence is not surrender. It is discipline. You are not refusing to engage. You are choosing the terms of engagement. This choice gives you authority over your own emotional energy, which is the truest form of control there is. Even in the digital world, where noise has become constant, you begin to practice digital silence. You no longer feel the urge to respond to every comment, to react to every post, to justify every opinion. You recognize that attention is energy, and that you can no longer afford to give it to things that do not nourish your soul. Before replying, you ask yourself, will this add peace or add noise? Most of the time, silence is the wiser contribution. In this way, you become immune to the collective addiction to reaction. You use technology without being used by it. You participate in the world without being consumed by it. And in doing so, you begin to reclaim one of the rarest powers of the modern age, the power of focus. Yet silence is not only for moments of restraint, it is also for moments of gratitude. When success comes, when praise finds you, when people recognize your worth, you meet it with quiet appreciation rather than loud celebration. You understand that success, like failure, is temporary, and that both are teachers in disguise. Your silence and joy is not denial of happiness. It is reverence for it. It is an acknowledgement that every triumph, no matter how great, is still part of something larger and impermanent. You celebrate without attachment. You bow silently to the mystery that allows you to experience both ascent and descent with grace. And when failure comes, as it inevitably does, you meet it with the same silence. You do not rush to explain, justify, or hide. You sit with it, breathe through it, and let it speak. You listen for the lesson hidden inside the loss. In the stillness that follows disappointment, you find wisdom waiting, an insight that would have been drowned out by noise. In this way, silence becomes your resilience. It allows you to bend without breaking, to endure without bitterness. Over time, this way of living transforms every ordinary day into a quiet meditation. Whether you are walking, eating, working, or resting, there is an undercurrent of stillness flowing beneath your actions. You become aware of the present moment as it unfolds, and that awareness fills even the simplest tasks with meaning. You no longer live distractedly, chasing the next thing. You live fully, here, now, with all your senses awake and your mind unburdened. At night, when the world slows down, you return consciously to the silence you began with. You turn off the lights, close your eyes, and feel the breath move through you. The same breath that moved through the first morning of creation. You realize that this rhythm, this silence, is eternal. It has been with you all along, through noise and stillness, through gain and loss, through every word you have ever spoken. And in that realization, you smile, because you understand now that silence is not something to practice. It is something to remember. It is the truth beneath all other truths, the home to which you always return. And when you live from that home, every sound in the world becomes music, every silence becomes meaning, and every day becomes an opportunity to speak less, feel more, and simply be.